between Valletta and the three cities, so it's something you can see. But now this idea of Fortress Island, if we think also with Fortress Europe, it becomes quite disturbing when you associate that, for instance, to migration. No?
Speaking actually of migration, you co-founded a project dealing with the issues of migration. Could you tell us more about it, and how does Malta deal with migration and migrants and the issues that come with them?
So in Malta, as in the rest of Europe, migration is also depicted like a problem, a crisis. Even though, speaking of disembarkment, there aren't any more in Malta. The last one actually was a few weeks ago, but it was an exception, because they're not happening anymore. There is this attitude of not going to help the boats if they are if they are not, of course, sinking that in Maltese waters. This is the only maybe reason that makes Maltese boats helping migrants. Otherwise, they just leave them going toward Italian waters. It happens like that. But still, migration is perceived as a problem, because actually, yes, it's the way you imagine something or you create discursively something that has concrete repercussion then in that something. For instance, we have a specific imaginary about migration, and again, there is a definition about migrants. They are always depicted like people in need, victim, because that is functional, of course, to a certain political discourse, the perpetuation, the reiteration, that kind of separation in image. And before I talk about this Fortress Island, but it puts these huge borders between outside and inside, but there are a lot of borders even inside, invisible borders. And more, the problem is not just to trespass these borders, but as it has pointed out in the recent research about migration, there is a sort of embodiment of the borders by migrant people, by refugees. So they embody this fact of being always in a sort of liminal kind of context. And so how we define now these people as concrete repercussions on their life. So they're not just abstract, symbolic kind of discourse or definition, because they have concrete repercussion, but also in the way people imagine themselves. For instance, I happened to interview this man who he was Palestinian, and then he had to move during the 80s, first to Lebanon, and then to leave Lebanon because of the civil war, and go to USA, and then to Malta again. So he was actually an exiled person, displaced person, a refugee, but he refused to be called a refugee, and he felt like he was a bad migrant, because his life, because of his maybe social class, or his education, he didn't have the same dangers, the same experience of other migrants. And so he said, okay, now you think that I am a bad migrant, because he embodied the same concept that a migrant has to follow that precise paths of that precise experiences. So it's how we think migration, that it's really condemning these people to remain this kind of liminal space. And that's why, yes, when I talk briefly about this project, when I decided to start this project, I decided to focus about how we imagine migration, about the discursive production of a migrant, and how actually that could be deconstructed and reimagined through other perspectives. And one of these perspectives is art, because art can be a really critical cut, can be something changing the perspective, the discourse, creating new imaginaries. And it's something that if we can of course, make art in some of also collective way, participatory way, and are something that is providing agency and the presence of people in the public space and public discourse, which are two things missing for a migrant experience, no? The presence of in a public space.